Well, welcome, Ben. Thanks so much for joining us on the Startup Diaries podcast today.
Pleasure to be here.
Let's kick off, Ben, with just an intro to who you are. You've got such an interesting background and education as a venture to the market. So would you be able to tell us a little bit about your background and a brief career overview as well?
Sure. So I guess relevant very long term back. As a teenager, into trying to predict the result of horse races, and through that I got into building neural networks, seeing if I could train a neural network to get the result of a horse race. Never got any good at it, and I kept records that were too accurate, so I couldn't fool myself for very long. I quite clearly wasn't making any money, but I got very into the idea of neural networks and how to build them. So I went to Oxford to study experimental psychology with a big focus on neuroscience.
Yeah.
While I was doing that, I got interested in the way that we teach neural networks versus the way that we teach humans. And it seemed to me that there was a very strange contrast there, that, for example, with language learning, the way that you train a neural network to produce human language is by feeding in examples of good language, seeing what output it gets and correcting it, and then doing a sort of recursive loop. But the way that I'd been taught languages at school, which had largely failed, was to teach me the rules, tell me the rules, give me a whole load of memories, and try and enact the rules on the words and try and transform them, which is quite clearly not how either a neural network is trained or a human brain is trained. And you don't have to look very far to see that's obviously the case. Human children do not learn the rules and then produce the language.
No.
They get a whole load of input. But it's interesting seeing how when a child or a non-native speaker speaks to you, it's incredibly hard when they make a mistake not to repeat back the corrected version. And it's just a sort of innate response. We just do it.
Definitely.
And actually, that's recreating a neural network training system.
Yeah.
They have taken their input, they are having their best guess at how to say it, and then immediately the other part of the system, feeds back if they've got it wrong.
Yes.
So I got really interested in that and thought, well, why is it that we teach it that way that is obviously not how our brains work? And then wondered whether if I was trying to learn a language just by trying to understand people and then going through their training processes, could I do it? So when I graduated, I moved to northeastern China on the border between Siberia and China, a province called Heilongjiang. And I meant to see if I could learn Chinese if I wasn't being taught the rules and being given that structure. I spent a while doing that, a lot by immersion, and it turns out I could. Within 6 months to a year, I was running a business entirely with a Chinese-speaking team. We were buying motorcycles off the Chinese army, restoring them, and then exporting them. So that was a kind of first taste of business. And then I set up a couple of other businesses in China before moving back. When I moved back to England, I then caught up with a couple of friends from university who also had studied psychology. And together we built this, we decided to build this platform to try and spread that approach to language learning to a much wider audience.
Yeah. No, and everything.
Well, and I should say that. So that app was called Memrise, which we've now grown to kind of 80 million users, tens of millions of dollars of revenue. And then more recently, I have moved to spend more of my time doing early stage startup investment and advisory, in particular focus on sustainability and climate tech.
Yeah, fantastic. Which I know we're definitely going to dive into in this chat. What I'm really interested to know is, the ed tech market, particularly for languages, has been, a major focus for many years, but such a difficult one, it seems, to disrupt and really hold the market. If you look way back when, it would be like the Rosetta Stone was, the key player, or perhaps nowadays Duolingo, and Memrise has totally taken the language ed tech market by storm. And I'm just curious to know, how did you strategize to disrupt that type of market?
Yeah, I think the edtech market is it's a couple of conflicting thoughts here. The edtech market is a very difficult one to build a product that really delivers on the promise of technology. And I think actually this is something where we'll come on later to the way that mission-driven founders get distracted by their vision. And I think actually something in what we were really trying to bring to the world was to execute on a product that actually made it possible for anybody to learn a language successfully. Not have that experience which 99% of people have of studying a language at school, having a whole load of random phrases about what job your father did,
Yeah.
and
What
never
sports
actually
do you
being,
have you played?
what hobbies you have, and then never actually being able to speak the language at all. And we feel that we have a way to deliver on that, and that is what we're laser focused on. In fact, though, and I used to sneer at them for this, but I actually think I used to be a bit snobbish about it. But I now recognize that this was a stroke of genius from Duolingo, who's probably been the biggest disruptors of the edtech sphere that there are. And I think their insight of genius was that most people who go to find a language learning app, the sort of job to be done, the problem they're trying to solve, is not actually speaking another language. And the crucial thing there is that they don't expect the product to deliver it.
No.
And you saw this. Saw this with Rosetta Stone as well. The Rosetta Stone was this extraordinary product where people would spend $600 on a set of CDs, put them on the shelf, never listen to more than 15 minutes of it, and still recommend it to their friends.
Yeah.
And it's a product that fails abjectly, but doing what it's supposed to do, which is teach you a foreign language. But actually, that's not what they were trying to do. They were trying to sell product. And the problem that people wanted to solve was to feel like they were doing everything they could to learn a language. And that's what Duolingo absolutely. I remember probably 10 years ago now, they published a blog post where they'd done a test on engagement levels when people were translating into the target language. And they found that if people were made to do those tests, then engagement levels dropped. They learned for less long and they didn't come back the next day because it's too hard.
Yeah.
So they've reduced the number of those tests. Now, if you were trying to actually teach someone a language, you'd be thinking, well, I'm not going to stop giving them the experience that they need in order to develop that skill.
Yeah.
But that's not what they're trying to do. They're trying to keep people engaged in a general, broad language learning-y kind of experience, because what they want is to scratch that itch of like, I feel like I should be learning a language, and this makes me feel like I am doing that. And actually, we interview a lot of users every week, and we interviewed some the other day about a 2,000-day streak on Duolingo. But when we put him into a conversation with GPT, couldn't talk at all. But crucially, didn't see that as a fault. He was like, I'm going back to Duolingo because that's safe. I know it's teaching me the right thing. I know how to do it. And I think that's a really important insight. I mean, I still don't want to build that product, but I think it's very important to understand and do that very consciously, that's an incredibly successful way. So back to your original question, how do you disrupt the edtech market? Well, I think understanding exactly what the problem is that you're solving for a particular user. Now, Memrise is very much focused on very serious language learners at the moment. It is the kind of polyglots. It's people who speak many languages. It's people who really do have to speak the language that they're learning. And that's a much smaller market than Duolingo is going after. It's still a big enough market for us to get to 80 million users, but it's a much smaller market than Duolingo's very, very broad one of people kind of wanting to engage in language learning, but not really expecting.
Yeah, perhaps wanting to dip their toe into languages rather than perhaps be an expert or a master in that particular language, which is obviously another
exactly, and not having that expectation that they're going to
be completely fluent and
exactly. So But I think right now we've got another huge opportunity in how you disrupt education using technology. I mean, I think in a way you can look at what is happening with AI and say that the previous technological revolutions that we've had, from like the printing press onwards, have a lot been about massively increasing the access to information.
Mm-hmm.
So the Gutenberg press enabled many more people to see the printed word. The internet has increased the access to information by 1 millionfold. But though that access to information has gone up 1 million times, the actual amount of learning going on has probably just sort of increased 10 or 15%. It's in no way matched the amount of increase in access to knowledge. And I think what AI does for us is it creates this possibility that we can create the simulations of the situations where you internalize knowledge. So in a language learning context, you may have a learning period where you are learning what some words mean when you're doing your grammar course or whatever. By the time when you internalize that and become able to speak it is when you are trying to make sense of someone who's talking in the language, when you're trying to express yourself. Now, those are situations that we couldn't in the past create without having real humans in the loop.
Humans,
But
yeah,
now we can. So now we can create these kind of infinite practice scenarios that allow people to actually internalize the knowledge. So whereas previous leaps forward in technology have been about access to information, I
yeah.
think the really exciting change that's happening now is about how we internalize that information.
Definitely. And you mentioned impacts of AI, and I'm sure as well, the developments within VR and AR are going to come into this as well in future. But I know that you guys wrote your own internal AI chatbot, and I'm curious to know the differences there as to why, something like ChatGPT completely took the market by storm. But like
Yeah, it
compared
was.
to AI softwares, why did no other AI softwares that internal AI chatbots, how comes they didn't break the market such as
So I think the sort of technology behind ChatGPT, being GPT-3,
Mm,
was released a year and a half before, 2 years before,
yeah.
and that's when we started building our product on it because that felt like a breakthrough.
Mm-hmm.
But the UI was quite clunky. It was quite
Okay.
you had to write these prompts, and then the AI completed the prompt, and that's quite an unintuitive way to go about using a product. So you had to write what you expected the AI, how you expected the AI to behave, what
Yeah.
character you wanted to have, and then you'd start a conversation, and then it would come back completing the prompt by saying what would come next.
Okay.
And it could do it incredibly well. But in order to turn that into a kind of conversational interface, required a bit of development work and stringing different pieces of UI together, which
Mm-hmm.
we did. But what we found was when we put that in front of users, they they so did not expect to be able to have a conversation with a chatbot
Mm.
that they didn't. They
Yeah.
expected it to behave like the sort of help desk chatbots you get, where
Yeah.
it's choosing from 10 different options.
Yeah.
And that expectation was so strong that however much we said, no, you can just ask it anything, literally say anything to it and it'll reply. If you make a mistake in Spanish, it'll correct your grammar. Like you know anything. People would be like, yeah, no, you can't, because that would be impossible.
Yeah.
And they
Yeah.
just wouldn't really use it. And then once ChatGPT came out, that just broke everyone's mental model and
Yeah.
recreated a mental model of how you could talk to an AI. And quite depressingly for us, the time between people not using it because they didn't understand what it could do and people saying, well, this is just like ChatGPT. Well, no, guys, was almost instant. But
Mm.
people did then, and I think there continues to be a lot of use cases to putting a bit of a wrapper around these foundational models and prompting them and linking them up to an experience that really makes sense and is a good
Yeah.
user experience. I think ChatGPT showed one way in which a change in the UX can have a massive impact in the uptake.
Yeah.
And I think that we'll see within different niches like language learning, like all kinds of things, feedback on music practice, on chemistry, whatever the area is you're learning. I think we'll get very specific, narrow wrappers that go around it and make it much more intuitive to use the tool for that purpose.
And it's still emerging, isn't it? As you say, like we're yet to see, and it's happening now. It's being developed now, and prompt engineering. You mentioned prompts within AI. And there's a lot of talk out there about the importance of prompt engineering. And is it going to be an emerging role that's going to have more importance, or is it going to be something that will just get to a certain stage and cut off? What do you think about?
It's very hard to tell. So I guess when we first built the Memble of language learning AI, the level of prompt engineering you needed to do was very high. So, for example, what you have to do when talking with the Memble is you have to complete different missions. So you might have a mission to persuade the barista to give you a 2-for-1 deal on coffees.
Okay.
And we every time you talk, we then have to get GPT to check the conversation and see, has that success criteria been met? And that can't just be a sort of matching, has the bot said this phrase? Because they could say anything. So it's a judgment call. Now, when we first built that, it wasn't very good. If you just asked GPT-3 at the time to do it, it wasn't very good at telling it. It would hit and miss. It got it right about 60% of the time. So then we had to structure the prompts differently. And what we did was say, first of all, make the case that this criteria has been met, then make the case that it hasn't been met. Now judge which of those is the better case. And that got it up to about 95% accuracy. So by giving it a kind of process for thinking through its reasoning, it got very, very much better at doing the reasoning. And then they released GPT-4, and it just did it straight out of the box. We didn't need the prompting. So all our clever prompt work just went, no longer needed. And that is an experience that is kind of coming again and again. I also, there was a great post written on Mindstone, which is a AI education platform, which has a kind of encyclopedic distillation of all the best knowledge about how to write really good prompts. And actually last week, we've now got a language learning AI tutor that lives inside WhatsApp. And so you just get your language learning inside WhatsApp. And I was just playing around with improving the prompts for that. And I was talking with the team and said, okay, well, let's just go away. Let's imbibe everything in this massive Mindstone. And then let's come back and do another iteration on these prompts. And one of the team was like, well, why would we read it? Why would we not just get the AI to read the Mindstone article and then improve the prompt? Oh yeah, that's what we should do. And so we did that, and actually it did it pretty well. And so that, which is curiously better than just asking GPT to come up with the rules for how to write good prompts. It doesn't do that very well. You can do very much better. But if you ask it to read the reference material and then apply that to updating a prompt that you've already written, it does that really, really well.
All right. Okay. So the human element very much needed.
So, well, I mean, in that case, someone has created the how to write good prompts. And now all you need to do is reference it and it updates it itself. So I think that the actual writing of prompts is likely to become less of a pinch point. But I think creatively thinking how to apply it to specific use cases, I think is the big, big growth area. So I think that if you use, there's the that old sort of saying that the people who made the real money in the gold rushes were the people selling picks and shovels. And I think that in the AI rush, it is likely the people who are teaching you how to use the picks and shovels who are going to make the big businesses. And I think understanding and training people in how to think about applying these incredible tools, but in ways that, it hadn't occurred to me that I should use the tool to write the prompt for me by reading the article. Obvious in hindsight. There are loads of ways that I work with a lot of startup founders in early stage businesses, and we're finding more and more ways to leverage AI to take away the need to grow your team too early. A lot of the admin tasks, a lot of the day-to-day operational tasks, a lot of research tasks that used to be, I need to have a founder's associate, I need to have this role. You
Yeah.
used to have to do that. You don't anymore. But you
Yeah.
do need to think creatively about how to do it. And obviously, as a startup founder, you don't have a hell of a lot of time to do that
Yeah.
thinking. So giving people the kind of tools to
Maximize that.
maximize those use cases. And I think that's something that we're really at the very foothills of starting to understand how to do.
That's exciting. I know that you mentioned at the beginning of the call that you obviously spend a lot of your time as well now on the investment side, as well as obviously founding your own business. And I'd really love to dive into what you're seeing in your particular investment areas. I know you said green tech is something that you're focusing on. So what's happening over there? What's happening in that part of the market right now?
So yeah, as you say, I'm super focused on sustainability, and that's really because angel investing for me, you can't really justify it in financial returns. I think
Yeah.
there's no one thinks that angel investing is going to be a great way to make money in general, but it is a way to influence the kinds of companies that can happen. And to me, like angel investing right at the very earliest stage, you're helping to make a company that would otherwise not happen.
Happen.
And I
Yeah.
think part of that is money. I invest small amounts, but also it's time and network and experience of having spent 15 years, 20 years building these kinds of businesses, using all of that to help people to succeed and to make those companies happen. So that's kind of what motivates me to do it.
Yeah. Definitely.
I think in terms of trends, like right now, raising money is very, very hard.
Yeah.
VCs don't have money to deploy. Angels have much less money to deploy than they did 2, 3 years ago. And it's just drying up throughout the system. And that comes through in people having more and more reasons to say no.
Yeah.
And people are really looking for reasons to say no rather than looking for reasons to get excited. I'm seeing a much stronger push as a result of that for customer traction. It's kind of absurd to say, but like the less you need the money, the more likely you are to get it. I mean, that's always been the case, but I think it's even more extreme now. Customer traction beats everything. And actually, I think that's extremely rational, particularly in climate tech, where everyone has good intentions to create businesses that have a huge positive impact. And
Yeah.
everyone wants it to be so, and you want to believe that the company's going to work. But unless you can find some company, or some large set of people in a whole set of companies who have a problem that they're willing to spend money on solving, unless you can find those people, it doesn't matter how much the world needs your solution. It's
Yeah.
not going to happen.
Yeah.
And I'm seeing a lot of people having to kind of go quite slow in order to wait out the tide in investment money being available. And to do that, focus on smaller paying customers, start getting that traction.
Yeah.
And then when the tide turns, they will be in the right place to catch the wave, mixing my sea metaphors there. Those are big trends. The other big trend for sustainability companies is that they have to be really creative in the sources of capital that they look for.
Yeah.
Like venture capital is often not the right type of money. If you want to do something in revolutionizing the way farms work, you probably can't raise SEIS investment, which cuts out a huge, or EIS investment, cuts out a huge swathe of the market. If you're wanting to invest in, or you're wanting to build hardware or hardware-software combinations, which a lot of climate tech requires us to build
Yeah.
real physical things, that's much, much harder to get funded than software. and B2B SaaS is where venture money most likes to go.
Yeah.
But climate tech really needs that combination of like atoms and bits. It needs both.
You made a really interesting sort of comparison when we were chatting before, that both the investment and the development is happening sort of like in tandem, or so we need these issues solved, but the technology just doesn't exist yet, and it's sort of unlike any other market because we just don't have.
I guess in normally what venture capital is doing is trying to get the timing right, where there is a wave of change coming because of a whole load of factors are there, and by investing in a founder who's living at the kind of forefront of that wave, who's seeing the future a bit better, is connected into the right places, you can kind of capitalize that change and make it happen faster. And you're looking for those opportunities. But that is a system where you're looking for opportunities in changes that are kind of happening anyway. And you're seeing, how do I get in front of that wave? But with climate tech, we're looking at it differently. We're saying, we all need this change to happen. Now, where can we make a wave happen?
Yeah.
And that's a much, and that requires putting together a lot more pieces. And it means that, if you're trying to build a reforestation startup to try and massively reforest, a company called Three Trees that has got these ambitions to reforest 1 million hectares across Africa. And they're doing incredible things there. But they need the carbon markets to be more developed. They need the monitoring software to be more developed. But actually, the monitoring software that monitors how much carbon has been captured through growth in forests can't really get accurate until you have huge numbers of forests growing and you can ground truth your satellite data. You need that data in order to be able to make that product better. But so they're all kind of interlocking.
Yeah.
And it's a sort of multiple chicken and egg problems that are all still together. And I think that's one of the unique challenges in climate tech.
Yeah.
Although I also think it means that when we get to those inflection points, we can see the pieces will fall into place, and a lot of pieces will fall into place at once, and we can get left off. But
yeah, it's very multidimensional. It's not just one problem, here's the solution. It's extremely complex.
Yeah, 100%.
What sort of missteps are you seeing? Some of these green techs making that perhaps if anyone's listening from that market, they might be able to extract from this.
Yeah, I mean, I think sort of back to what I said earlier. I think the biggest difficulty for mission-driven founders, and I include myself at Memrise, is that we have a vision of how we want to see the future being different and better, and we get very attached to that vision. And the danger of that is that it makes it hard to listen to what the market is actually telling you, and to respond to that. And really, startups as a methodology for delivering exponential growth and therefore change at an incredibly rapid rate. And that's why they have such a crucial role to play in the climate emergency, is that they're a sort of methodology for creating economic incentives for rapid growth, rapid change. But they only work because they're a process for finding market fit in a scalable market. And you need to find the product that fits a customer need. So if you come in as a founder with a very strong view that this is the product, I have seen the future, this is the system that it needs to look like, then you probably won't get there because you're almost certainly wrong. Any complex system that you can design from the beginning, very unlikely to be the one that works. And the kind of startup methodology is to build that thin, simple slice that you can start with that can then be built upon layer by layer until you build up to a complex system. And during that process, you need to be able to take on information that is counter your initial plan. And rather than be offended by it or ignore it, you need to take it on. So there's a great there is a content creator around growth processes called Diego Huadar, who has a newsletter called Please Don't Push, which I highly recommend to anyone.
Okay.
And he talks about the idea of needing to be anti-fragile when building a product.
Okay.
So rather than having a sort of brittle view of this is my vision and I'm
Yeah.
building it, and any any information that doesn't agree with it is negative and risks breaking it.
Yeah.
What Diego looks at examples like famous ones like Justin TV. Don't know if you know that, the live streaming platform.
Yeah.
And they noticed that a small, about 8%, but highly engaged segment of their user base was streaming video games, streaming themselves playing video games. And they looked at this and they were like, well, that's not what we wanted to build. It's weird. Why are people doing that? But they noticed the pattern. They created it. They spun up a separate website to test it, and it took off. And that became Twitch, which became a much, much larger business than their initial one. And that was by responding and being kind of anti-fragile. Slack is another example, famous one. There are, in fact, most really successful startups have that kind of moment where they look at what the market is actually telling them. They're like, oh, hold on.
Yeah.
I thought we were building that, but actually they were building something different.
Yeah.
And I think the uniquely difficult thing for climate tech founders is that you need to be open to that, that anti-fragile process and taking on new information, but you've still got your compass setting of I've got to have a positive impact.
Yeah.
So you can't
do that.
shift to something. You can't get that far. And I think that's a very difficult thing also because people care so deeply about, and it is so existentially important that we get to a good result. So the founders, I don't know, of Justin TV, I imagine they weren't so existentially wrapped up in the fact that the world needed a streaming platform. Otherwise, it was going to be a planet scale disaster. So they could just be like, well, the market's saying that they want to stream video games, so screw it, let's go stream video games.
Yeah.
Whereas the climate tech founder is like, wait, hold on.
That's not
No, I don't.
Yeah.
That's not the right answer. And so it's a much harder, or there are fewer ways to thread the needle on that. And
yeah. So I guess just you must be malleable, but obviously understanding that you don't want to lose the concept of what the purpose was, but just be malleable enough to like be reactive enough to what the market's telling you, what your audiences are telling you, and make it work for.
Right. And I think that the mindset there has to be that although you've got a vision of what you want to build, when you go out to test it, I hear people saying, oh yeah, we got really positive user testing results. You shouldn't have that as a concept. What you're doing, you know that your vision is wrong. 100% certainty that your vision is wrong. So what you want is to find out how it's wrong as fast as possible.
What part? Yeah.
What part is wrong? And if you go out and people are just liking it, well, you haven't learned anything, have you?
Yeah.
So
the growth is smaller than.
Yeah, you have not made as much progress. Whereas if you uncovered something that's really interesting, we got this other feedback. Okay, that changes how we think. That's exciting. That's the learning. Yeah. Otherwise, you're just trying to get rewarded for being right first time, and there are no prizes for being right first time.
Yeah.
And in fact, it means that you don't strengthen the ability to be right second time and third time and go through that process. And that's what you're going to need ongoingly. Because even if you are roughly right first time, you're going to be wrong second, with the second thing you build. And so you need to have this mindset of like, how am I wrong? How do I find out where I'm wrong? So that I can build the right thing. And the only way of discovering what the right thing is to build is by building a really, really simple version and making it a little bit more complex, and layering it.
Yeah. I guess that's part of that condensed roadmap of a startup, isn't it? A lot of these founders have broken away from large corporates to go off and do their own thing, and so they don't necessarily have their startup blueprint maybe brilliantly defined. So is there anything to be said around that from your experience and from what you're seeing in the businesses you're investing in terms of sort of roadmaps and how to effectively
Yeah,
build
so
it?
I mean, I think a roadmap, often in a corporate environment, you're dealing in so much lower risk when you're building a project. If you just take an example of like building a building, you know that you can build a building, you know what the building is supposed to look like, and you just need to go and build it. Broadly,
Okay.
there's not a hell of a lot of risk involved. Things might get behind time, but that's
Yeah.
through bad roadmap. But in a startup context, the crucial difference is that you don't know where you're going. Not
Mm,
exactly. In fact,
like you
you
say.
you have a vision of the end state, but you know that's wrong. It's definitely wrong. And so the roadmap that you have is not, I want to get there. What is the best road to take me there? And what's the order of things? You're trying to discover where you're going.
Mm,
And the way that, rather than a roadmap, it's more like a de-risking map. And to switch metaphors, you probably want to work out what is the area of greatest uncertainty in the system that you're building. So think about the parts of the system and which part are you least certain of. It's like building a dry stone wall. You want to work out the biggest rocks first. What
mm,
shape are they? Because then you can fill the little ones in around the side.
yeah.
But if you build it in the kind of logical execution order, but there's a really uncertain bit towards the end, when you get to the end, and then you're going to have to rebuild everything that came before in order to fit that big piece in because you have misunderstood what shape it was. So it's a sort of de-risking roadmap rather than
Yeah.
an execution roadmap. And you have to be comfortable with the fact that that means that you will come back and change things. You will throw things away. You will get things wrong. And that's not wasteful. Often people come from a corporate environment, or I remember working with a designer who had worked in animations and in film production, where you have to be you know that you can make a film, and you have to be much tighter on the order that you do things and where you can make decisions and how you use the resources to get there. The uncertainty in a startup is so much greater
Mm,
that process just doesn't work. And this guy always got frustrated and saying, "But we're just throwing away work. We're throwing it away. This is wasteful." But it's not,
part of
because
the
the work isn't the point. The point
yeah.
is the learning,
Yeah.
and that discovery is what you are doing, not building the piece of product. And
Yeah.
that informed how you shouldn't overbuild it. You can over-engineer it. You can over-design it. Build the smallest version that will allow you to learn, and then
Learn.
throw it away, and then move to the next.
Yeah. Yeah. You just can't get there without going through, you have to have the difficult road, as it were, don't you? If it was all easy, then what was the progress? Um,
Yeah.
I'm really interested in the fact that obviously your background is psychology, and you're not necessarily the technologist that we might see have lots of success in the tech market. And I'd love to know, who you think manages to break through in the tech market like yourself, but that aren't from traditional backgrounds.
Yeah, so I think the big advantage that technical people have in startups is fundamentally the very early stages that you can build something
Yeah.
yourself and while eating ramen in your dorm room, and you don't need to be funded. So you can get you can go through the first 1,000 iterations yourself without needing to employ anyone. And the biggest danger that non-technical founders have is that they have an idea for an app and then they engage an agency to build their first idea for the app. And it's wrong, because it always is. And then they end up spending all their money building something that isn't right.
That wasn't right. Yeah.
And they fail. And that's why investors don't want to invest in them. And that's why you get a better success rate if you are a technologist. Now, I think that is changing really rapidly. Um, I think that AI makes more and more possible. I think the no code and low code tools are
Yeah.
incredibly powerful now. I'm working with one founder who had spent years employing developers to try and build. He's kind of a social network for footballers called Baller Box, BLR Box, and they footballers like post videos themselves playing. They contact with clubs. It allows kind of semi-pro and lower-end pro footballers to get positions in clubs around the world. And he spent a couple of years building this with developers, but being really frustrated. He was always being blocked. He couldn't test something because he had to pay another developer $5,000 to change that.
Yeah.
And about 6 weeks ago, he said to me, actually, I found a no-code tool. I've rebuilt the app myself in the last week. It'll be ready to go next week. It doesn't have all of the features, but actually it has most of the important ones. Importantly, things like the payment infrastructure just doesn't break, which was bringing up before, and also the account creation. And it allows him to test a huge amount of features that he can just change it. As a non-technical person who's no technical background, he can create this quite rich social media app on his own. You know, those opportunities are enormous.
Yeah.
I also see, but crucially, he isn't technical, not a developer, but is prepared to engage with trying to understand it. And I think you do have to have that mentality. You know, I don't develop at all. I have written code in Memrise in certain situations, but not much of it. But you have to engage with the structure of how it's working to understand how things are possible.
Yeah.
But again, I think like LLMs are making it much, much easier to
Access,
ask it how
really.
you do something.
Yeah.
Get it to write the code, drop it in. It's a bit slower, but it's totally, totally possible. And I think that is a huge leveling ground in terms of getting startups off the ground. And I think that ultimately what that means is that anyone who has that anti-fragile mentality of wanting to, of being motivated enough by a vision to go out and try and build it, but being open enough to new feedback and to seeing how they're wrong. Anyone who's got that mentality and is prepared to engage with the technology can be a successful technology founder at this point.
Definitely. And I guess, you know, which ties into our next question is that what you look for in who you invest in? And alongside that, you know, what do you look for?
So I think there's a cliche to say that the founder is everything, particularly the very early stages. You know that whatever the business they're pitching you on, the vision that they've got, that's not going to be what ends up being successful. That's not how it works. So what you're looking for is to understand, do they have that ability to iterate, and do they have that right mentality? Now, I know from having done hundreds of these meetings that if I try to make a decision off a first pitch and discussion for an hour, I see a bias in my decisions towards people that look like me and sound like me and think like me. And so I think I feel safer making judgments about them, and I'm more likely to get swept up in their way of talking and their excitements. But I don't have any evidence that that's a good way of making decisions. In fact, counter. And so I don't think that's a good way to seek out the right people. So a lot of what I have to try and do is counteract that innate bias that I think is, I'm sad that it's there, but it's a part, I can't really deny that it's there based on the evidence I see. So what I now try and do is to work with teams for a while and have a series of meetings, talk about the problems as we see them, ask them to go out and get some customer data, some evidence, see how they respond to information that is counter to what they expected, and see what they can do with that. And if I can work with teams for a while and I can see these people know how to, they've got that tenacity, they've got that openness, that flexibility, that anti-fragile mentality, then I can get really excited. And then I go and start pitching to other investors, see who I can get excited about it. And then if I can get other people excited about it based on my level of confidence in the team, then I'll go and invest. So that's the kind of process for me.
Yeah, no, that's great. There's it's refreshing to hear that honesty. And, I know that you said that you're really trying to advocate for, diversity and inclusion in all of your investments.
Yeah,
As a
which I think is both because that's part of how I would like the world
world to
to
be.
be. I
Yeah.
mean, but also because I think that a lot of this is really more of an aesthetic sense than something that I have particular data for, but I do feel like the decision making of business leaders from a kind of white middle-aged men perspective and that kind of energy towards decision making is a lot of what has got us into the problems that we have in the climate disaster, and that more of the same, even if the businesses look like they're doing the right things, that same kind of energy and mentality is likely to sort of swing too far another direction. And I think we do need more diversity of leadership in the businesses that are having an impact on the world. And I think that a lot of the reason that founders from those backgrounds have been successful is because investors see people who look like them, and money is controlled. Money is controlled by people who look a certain way, and therefore goes into companies that look a certain way. So, yeah, that's a lot of my thinking behind why it's important to try and make those shifts, and why it's also so resonant with sustainability and
Yeah.
the goals of investing in sustainability.
Yeah, it's a way for us to break that cycle and start. It's green tech is an emerging market, and therefore we have an opportunity to rewrite, I guess, the people that have notoriously been invested in, which is fantastic.
Which are people like me, which that is an uncomfortable fact in this conversation, but there you are.
Well, thank you for your insights so far, and definitely for your opinions on who and what you invest in. And wrapping up with our final question, Ben, is there one piece of advice that you'd like to leave for founders out there? It could either be for edtech, like you said, your own business, or it could be for green tech founders that you invest in. Other than got no fragility, we've gone through some fantastic advice already.
We got through some. I guess maybe just there's one thing that I find myself having this conversation a lot with founders. Super specific, but maybe it'll be helpful to someone who's listening. So particularly, like, this is really B2B founders, but I find the first question investors have is like, who is your customer? And almost always people fail on that one by talking at too high a level or general a level.
Okay.
The process that I think people need to go through is something like this. You use it. The first stage is you need to identify the organization that your customer, the organization customer, and then the person within that organization who's your customer.
Okay.
It isn't necessarily the user of your software, but it's the decision maker who says you've got to use this. To do that, I find that you can use a tool like Dripify.io, which allows you to work with LinkedIn. You use that to specify the kind of organizations you want to reach out to and a kind of range of profiles within those organizations. You then send outreach messages to them. You can do a couple of follow-up messages and try and arrange some calls. Say that you're doing research into the problem area. Don't tell them what you're selling, but research into whatever your problem area is. Get yourself a meeting. Then use mum test style questioning. I don't know if you've ever read the mum test, but if not, read the mum test. It's a way of doing customer interviews that doesn't lead to witness. So worth looking at that. Ask them about the problem area, the kinds of problems that they're having in their business, and then ask them to relate to your product, and then ask them the person in the organization who makes the buying decision. And that helps you home in on the specific person. Then you do a second round of outreach based on what you've learned there, targeting more specifically the right person in the organizations and with a message based on what you learned in phase one. So a more targeted message of, I've got a product that does this. Because from phase one, you should have learned what is the burning problem that they've got that your problem can address, and who is the person who can pay to solve that problem. So then you outreach to those people. You should be getting more than a 5% response rate at this point, ideally more than 10 or 15%. And I've seen people getting up to an 80% response rate from these kind of outreach messages if you really target someone who's having a burning problem.
Mm.
Then you try and get those people to sign letters of intent and say, if you build this product, hell yeah, I'll buy it, and get them excited about it. As you move those LOIs forward and start building something that those people can use, you then look to go out and do a funding round. And those letters of intent, like the more customers you've got lined up saying you'll buy, the better. But then there's kind of icing on the cake is if you can get one or more of those customers in the decision-making organizations who do an angel investment, even if it's a very small one. If you go to them and say, we're building this, you believe in it, you're excited by it, can we get you on as an angel investor, give them some preferential terms, let them invest, 1,000, 5,000 small tickets. But if you go out for raising your angel round and you're saying, I've got this list of customers, I know exactly who my customer is. I've got this list of customers who've signed letters of intent. 3 of them, the person at the business has angel invested. Then the risk for your next set of investors is dramatically reduced, because the biggest risk they come in with is that it sounds good, but as you know, one's going to buy it. And all those proof points are showing that the people who are the customers really believe in it and really think it's going to be bought. And obviously revenue is the very best thing, but that tends to be a little further off. So those are kind of nearer term signals that you can get to. And that process of using Dripify, outreach over LinkedIn, works really, really well for B2B SaaS products.
Amazing. That's fantastic advice. Well, on that note, Ben, I could speak to you all day long, but I think we'll probably have to wrap it up there. So just a huge thanks for coming onto the show.
Thanks, Liv. It's been a total pleasure.